Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Daraja. This is Omar bringing you the Stairway to Your Higher Self podcast. Daraja is an Arabic word that means levels, stages, steps, or degrees. In each episode, we'll bring you stories of Muslim leaders from around the world who have overcome significant challenges through discipline, positivity, and faith. Our goal is that you'll be inspired through their stories to reach your higher self. Welcome to Daraja. I am excited to be talking to none other than Naz Shah. She's a British Labour parliamentarian. She was elected in 2015 in the general election as a member of parliament for Bradford West, winning the seat from George Galloway. She has also served in the opposition front bench since 2018 as Shadow Minister for Crime Reduction. Naz, welcome to the Daraja Stairway to Your Higher Self podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be on.
Absolutely. I am excited about your story because I think yours is one of inspiration, one that will leave our audience not only in awe, but inspired because, from where you started to where you are today. And of course, as human beings, we continue to face challenges. But you have proven that, you can come out on top, you could come out on the other side despite of your challenge. So just for our audience, I'd like to give you kind of a preview of how we're going to break up this episode of the podcast. First, we're going to start with Naz's childhood. Then we're going to talk about her first marriage and then what happens after her marriage. Let's start at the beginning. You were 6 years old. Obviously, you were born in the UK. So what was your childhood like?
So my childhood up until 6 was absolutely beautiful. I was the apple of my father's eye. I was, I had a normal kind of extended family. My mum came to the UK in the 70s as a bride to her first cousin. And my dad was, spoke broad Yorkshire English and was a really, really nice kind of, he'd light up the room when he walked in, real kind of man about, street guy. And he had a business. He was doing really well. Mum was living with the extended family. And then at 6 years old, my life turned upside down because my dad eloped with the neighbour's daughter, and he left us. And that's where you kind of like remember the good things, and you also remember the kind of things that shaped your life. And that day in February when my dad left was the day that really the story of the birth of Naz Shah, if you like, the Naz that you know and the one that I know now started. And that's where the struggle started. The memories I do have are at 6 years old being put into the back of a car with our what you called garbage bags, we call black bin liners. And my life kind of became defined. And as I talk about the rest of it, it was all about black bin liners, your belongings into a black bin liner, into the back of a car, and moving. And we just moved and moved and moved. And my mother was pregnant with my sister, who was born in July 1980. So, it. And my younger brother was only 3 years old. My brother and I both had TB. My mum didn't know English. And my very early memories, apart from being in the back of that car outside Hartman Place, was my mum getting lost on a bus because we went on a bus and to my grandparents, my granddad's house, and my mum didn't know where she was, and the bus driver, bless him, got out of the bus and showed her, "You're only a few hundred yards away." But it didn't stop my mum absolutely crying her eyes out with three kids, one in a tiny pushchair, and myself and my brother. So those are the kind of memories that you have, just moving from with black bin liners from one place to another, squalor to squalor, in deprivation, in poverty. But you don't know that at the time because you're only 6. You don't know that you're in deprivation because you have a mother who loves you and will do anything for you, and she makes sure you're fed and she makes sure you're clothed. So you don't realize you're in poverty and how much abject poverty you're in. I mean, the fact that we had one room and we lived in that room, I didn't understand that the reason why we didn't sleep in the bedroom was because we couldn't heat that room. It was just because that's how things were. So those were the kind of childhood memories. My brother and I both had TB, so we were on medication. So it was just poverty. But we had each other, and mum was, my mum is. I am my mum. I am kind of, when I think about my mum, it's her that's kept me together. It's her that raised us the way she did. That tarbiyah came from her, and despite everything that she went through, she never gave up on us. And after that, you went to school. There's a few things that kind of define themes that run throughout my life, and that's the patriarchy. You don't realize it at the time, but the fact that, and the shame and the dishonor that the women bear the burden of. And it was, you can't do this because you haven't got a father. It will bring shame. I mean, I saw my first movie, and I'll never forget, it was Rocky Five. And when I was 12 years old, just before I went to Pakistan, that was the first experience I had of cinema, you know, because my best friend at the time, Joanna Lockwood, she loved Rocky. And she was like, "You've got to go." We went to the Odeon to watch Rocky, and it was a big deal because at the time my mum didn't want me to go to the pictures because, again, it was not what a good girl does. It was, you have not got a father,
Yeah.
and ideally it'd be your father who should take you or your brother who should take you. So you can't go to the pictures. I remember it being a battle going to watch a movie with my best friend who was 12 at the time. So there was that whole kind of your expectations of behaviour, where the measuring yardstick for you was much, much higher, just
Right.
because you didn't have a father, because you were the child of a single parent, because you didn't have extended family around, and you didn't have that structure of community to protect you, because it doesn't matter that your husband has left you, it matters that you are on your own, and it matters that it's a woman that bears the burden of that shame. When I look back at it, I'm at the ripe old age of 50 this year, you know, um, and I look back at it and I think, wow, that still runs throughout, those 45 years. It's changed, but there's still that concept of patriarchy. There's still
Right.
that concept of, the shame and dishonor that the women bear the burden of, and it's never given to the man. So those were the things that really took me up to the age of 12, I suppose, until I went to Pakistan.
In spite of everything you've been through, here you are. You're an MP in the UK that has influence, and you're challenging these stereotypes, and it's such an inspirational story. I wanted to ask you though, obviously your father was removed from your life at a very early age. Your mom did the best she could to take care of you, but it was almost as if your childhood was disrupted with the removal of your father from the picture. Um, did you have to take care of your mom in terms of, you talked about, at the age of 6? What was that like as a 6-year old for you? Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
So mum couldn't speak English, and because she couldn't speak English, her benefits, going to the doctors, going to, I had to be her translator. So overnight, you lose your childhood because overnight you become a carer. You become the responsible person that you're relied upon, and that impacts on your childhood because you're the person who's now, you know, making sure mum, when she goes to the benefits agency, she's making the right claims. She's all of those things, that responsibility on a 6-year-old is quite, at the time you just get on with it because that's the circumstance you're faced with. But those are the cards you dealt. You just learn to play with them. But it was very, very, I think when you have to do that, it gives what you talked about earlier about grit and that resilience. I didn't even know the word resilience because I left school at 12. I was shipped off to Pakistan because of, in all this time my mum met a man who paid the deposit of the house using her gold, sold her gold because she wanted to buy a house. And when Adam came on the scene, he sexually exploited her because she was vulnerable, and he abused her for years and years and years. And when he had designs on me, my mum sent me to Pakistan. I was there for 2 years and 4 months. I didn't come back, Umar, until I was 15 years old and had a forced marriage. Not my mum that forced me, but my extended family who coerced me into this marriage, because of family pressures. And in living in Pakistan for 2.5 years, leaving school at 12 for my mum to try and protect me from this guy, who then by the time I was 18, had eventually killed because she'd got me away. But now my sister was growing up, who was 11. you know the this it's really interesting. It's hard to it's kind of like, how do you put this into a timeline of what happened at 12? 6, you become responsible for your mum. At the age of 12, you're shipped over to Pakistan, in a country you've never been to before, and you're without your parent, without your siblings, and you're playing. I was a bit of a tomboy when I grew up, because I had, my dad had 8 brothers, so, or a lot of them were younger than my age. So I was kind of like the eldest grandchild. So when I did have my relatives and my uncles that I played with, I grew up with. And then when I went to Pakistan, another incident happened where I was playing with my cousin. I was only 13 years old. And I remember my cousin said, you can't, my female cousin said, you can't play with him. Why can't you? Because you'll be marrying him. I was 13. The idea that you even think about marriage at the age of 13 and you can't play with your cousin as a child, it robs you of your childhood, let alone robbing me at the age of 6 of my childhood. But at 13, you have some concept, some idea of life and what have you. But you still don't think about marriage. You're still not thinking about, the responsibility of what you have to do. And that day, I felt that I consciously felt that I've been robbed of my childhood, because I wasn't allowed to be a child. I had to think like, an adult, because this is what's expected of you. And then staying there for 2 years and 4 months, and I learned because when I went, I didn't realize I was going to be there that long. So I was really happy in the village. You know, I did every job a villager could do, whether it was, going and the farming, the wheat, the corn, the sowing of the crop, cutting the crop, preparing the crop, the buffaloes, the milking of the buffaloes, the using the buffalo dung to turn it into fuel for the fire, on burning fire to make chapatis on, to make food on. I had all them experiences. I didn't know I was going to be stuck there for 2 years and 4 months. And so when I came back, I was 15 and married.
So you got married in Pakistan and then you brought your husband over.
Yeah, so I had to go back in when I was 16, because technically, legally, I couldn't be married till I was 15. So Islamically, I could be married as 15. But for my marriage, for the purpose of a visa, I had to go back and resubmit a second nikah, a nikah nama, which we'll come to when we talk about the Galloway issue. And again, the so when I went back to Pakistan when I was 16, had the proper wedding ceremony, and then he came over to England by the time I was 17, because I was working. I was working. When I came back at 15, I didn't go back into education. I started working private jobs, and just because mum didn't send me back to school. So I just worked packing Pampers reject nappies into big bags. And I remember my first wage being £9 something for a whole week's wage. That's like, I think it's like $7 or $8 for a whole week's wage of packing. I mean, I got better at it. I went up to 100 and something a week. But in those days, at the age of 15, that's what I was doing.
Can you give us like a synopsis of your life from 16 through 18? What was that like?
So 16, I was working. I'd got promoted. I was working now doing the laundry for the local hospital in a laundrette, and then washing the sheets, putting them through their kind of big industrial ironing and drying machines. Then I got even luckier and went to Seabrooks Crisps, packing crisps. It paid much better. Did the food industry, which is now in my constituency. So I was getting good money. Husband came over, but I didn't want to be in that marriage, and I was and I because we didn't have any. He wasn't. It was a forced marriage. I didn't want to be in the marriage. I was doing it because that's what you did. You just got on with it. So I spent as much overtime as I could in my job. By the time I was 18, I left home because I was craving to go back into education. I didn't want this life. So I left home. I left my job, took some savings, went down to Watford, and my mum rang me, and I spoke to my mum about a few days later, and she was very upset, because I'd ran away effectively, and said, "You've got to come home. He's gone. He's not here anymore. He's gone to Germany." So I came home. All they'd done was moved him to another relative's house, and at that point, that was in January. By April, we had another tragedy, which is where the guy who'd been exploiting my mum had come to the end of a tether. She'd attempted suicide. She'd had he exploited her. He was in prison for drug trafficking. He pimped her from prison to inmates for favours. My mum had had enough of that life, and she tried to kill herself, and she eventually killed him. So on April the 11th, she murdered the man who abused her. So I'd just come back remember January, February, I'd come back into the family home. My husband had gone. And then April, all this happened. And then when that happened, mum life again changed. And it became, because of the hold that he had over the house. And that was why my mum was exploited, why she was abused, the sexual abuse she took, and the pimping and all the rest of it. And my mum got locked up. She eventually got locked up. She got arrested. I got arrested twice on two occasions. Then mum got arrested and charged with murder. And then it was, well, you can't live on your own now because you've not got your mum. So you've got to bring your husband back. Despite all the beatings, you've got to bring him back into the house because you've got to have a male figure around. I started talking about me having a forced marriage by the time I was in my 30s. By the time I was elected to Parliament, that one day I just sat there and I called it what it was, which was rape. And then I kind of like owned that this is what my experience was. But it's taken me years to get to that conclusion because even forced marriage, you don't call it because a forced marriage isn't where, you're putting a gun to somebody's head. It's that coercion. It's
Right.
that pressure. You're vulnerable. At 15, what do you know about marriage? You're a child. When I look at my kid, when my children, my daughter was 15, there were times when my daughter and my niece, because they're 6 months apart, would be playing, and I'd just sit there and burst into tears. And I'd get so emotional because I'd think they just sat there on their Snapchat, they sat there giggling about makeup, they sat there giggling about songs, they sat there giggling about, what's happening in school and what have you. I never experienced any of that. And for my child to be able to live that normality, it was kind of like such a sigh of relief that we'd broken the cycle. We'd broken the cycle of shame and honor defining you as a child, defining you as a girl, and that you can be who you want to be. You can be whoever you choose to be, and there's no pressure or expectation or measuring yardstick for
Yeah.
you against my boys.
What does the word dean mean to you?
Deen means that connection between you and God. It's not for the world to judge. It just means it's so simple to me. It's so simple. It's not complicated. It's just about being true to who you need to be, but with the love for God. And not because there's a measuring, there's nobody who's going to judge you apart from Him. The only person you need to satisfy is your connection with Him, and that's a one-to-one connection. In whatever I do, my Lord expects me to be giving to my neighbours and only giving what I would expect for me. My Lord expects me to be good to my parent. He expects me to maintain those relationships, and those are challenges on this short earth, that you be the best that you can be. And for some people, that best is changing the world. For some people, that best is being the best of making sure you're running a soup kitchen, which is feeding the homeless. There's some people, it's maintaining and caring for their loved ones because they've got disabilities or they've got whatever, and they're managing their home the best they can against a backdrop. It's whatever your internal test is. For me, embodying that and being able to live it and know that on a night when you sleep, you can say to me, "Oh Lord, you know what? Alhamdulillah, I live another day. If I wake up tomorrow, I will continue." It's really simple. It really is. It's not complicated for me at all. But ultimately, it's me. It's just being the best human being you can be. and it's fulfilling.
It absolutely is. Like how you started navigating that journey of, extracting her from the prison system.
So when Mum met Southall Black Sisters, they met her, and immediately the forensics were really clear that she'd murdered him. So the question was, why? So they asked her that question. And I often say, had my mum been arrested by a woman of colour or a woman from my community, she would have probably seen there was something not quite right here. Had she been represented by a person, a lawyer, who was of her community or a woman of colour, she'd have had a different experience. Had the judges and the police been different, been people of colour or from the community or from the culture, they'd have picked all this up. But it took a woman from a rights advocate, a women's rights advocacy group, Southall Black Sisters, to meet my mum and say, "We know you killed him. It's very clear why." And at that point, they started piecing the story of abuse. They started piecing together. And it was in 1995 we started the campaign for her appeal. So it was 3 years in, and we started the campaign for appeal. And that's when I remember my first public speech in Bradford to call, to get support for my mum's campaign. We launched for Zora Shah, the Free Zora Shah campaign. And I had it written down and I just cried. I did not get through that one A4 sheet. I just cried my eyes out in Bradford College and I couldn't get my words out. And then, because I was asking people, I was begging people to help us. And then we got an appeal hearing. We started campaigning. I spoke at events. I went on the TV. I went to Parliament to lobby Jack Straw. It
Yeah.
was interesting. So, and that was my first ever visit to Parliament as a campaigner to ask for the then Home Secretary Jack Straw to reduce my mum's tariff. So I campaigned. I travelled up and down the country. I spoke at conferences. I spoke at events. I had a documentary made. I'm trying to get my mum out of prison. So that the campaigner in me was born. We reduced her tariff from 20 years to 12 years, but she still served another 2 years because the system wasn't equipped. It's a Eurocentric model. My mum's forgiveness was to God. It wasn't a Eurocentric model, right? So she was on her nama, and for her, she was now free of abuse. So she became healthy. She became, she learned to cook. She got certificates to cook in the kitchens. She was cooking in the kitchen. She was free of any pressure of maintaining a mortgage, pressure of maintaining. So she actually thrived physically. The only punishment she had was being separated from her kids and not having the freedom. By the time my mum came out in 14 years, we all owned our own homes. We were all married. We were all settled. I
Mm.
had my first child. My sister had her first child. Mum had come home. She came home to us in a very, very secure environment. So those years were literally defined by fighting every step of the way.
At what point did you confront George Galloway?
George Galloway came to Bradford, and Bradford is dominated by a model of politics which is from Pakistan, which is Bradri politics, clan politics. We've had papers written on it, we've had research done on it, and it was about family dynasty, people who had power and control. That didn't do community development because I'd been a community development worker. That kept women behind. It didn't include the women. It was by men, for the purpose of power. And that was about Bradley. So George Galloway came in, knight in shining armour, hadn't heard of him before, in 2012, said, "I'm going to break Bradley politics." And I thought, right, that can only be a good thing. So I voted for him in 2012. We had a massive, political earthquake, if you like, in Bradford, because Bradford was seen as Labour, and then George Galloway swept it from us. And then the guy made comments about the rape, the Julian Assange stuff, and I really, really struggled with all of that. And I bought into the idea that he'd break the Bradley, but actually he was just an opportunist. He was just he was a demagogue, Trumpian, divisive figure. So by the time 2014 came, which was literally 2 years in, I was asked what is wrong with Bradford, and I knew intrinsically that the racism. So what happened is I said, look, it's racist because you've got people in positions of power who are incompetent, but we keep them in positions of power because it's the Pakistani model of politics and it's run by men, it's patriarchal, it's regressive to women, but the white folk ain't challenging it because they're getting you block votes, so you're keeping the people where they are rather than empowering them. So I went up on a rant, and the guy said, "Would you ever, have you ever thought about politics?" I went, "Don't be daft. It's a man's world, and it's the dirtiest place to be." And he went, "Well, if you not in it, who's going to clean it up?" And I thought to myself, you know what, that's a fair point. That was on the 1st of June 2014. By 6th of May 2015, I was elected. It was a fast, fast experience. It was, I went to, and again, I went through the selection process, and I didn't make the selection. I didn't get voted in by the members because the members voted for somebody who came out of the city. And then the only reason I got a second shot at it was because she decided her kids were doing GCSEs and she was too busy. The rest of the day is history, but I had a really interesting election because George Galloway pulled out my Nikah. They've ordered the paperwork for my mum's campaign, for my mum's appeal hearing, and said because I'd said I had a forced marriage at 15, and it said in my mum's statement that she'd been back to Pakistan when I was 16 to get married, they said, oh, she's lying. So he had my marriage certificate from my 15th when I was 16. And I was like, well, yeah, you would, because there's two, because there's one when I was 15 in my nikah. But he said, oh, it wasn't a forced marriage because she was, her mother was there. And it was like, guy, you're undoing the work that we've done to highlight the issue of forced marriage. And the intimidation, I'm the wrong person to try and intimidate. I ain't been intimidated by, you ain't intimidating me. I had crows thrown on my doorstep with stuffed dead crows, with stuffed beaks, with grass. I had him on his, the intimidation tactics were surreal. But I'm from Bradford, and I've lived in Bradford, and I care about Bradford, and it's my city, and it's like, you were an absentee MP, you were never here. You used my city and my space to give you the platform. I never made the link back to Rocky Five. Maybe that's what it was.
That's exactly. I was gonna say he didn't go far back enough in your history to see that you've watched Rocky Five. You were an adult at 6 years old. Then he would have known to come at you from a different perspective. But you know, what I love about your story is where you started, and it's almost like a phoenix rising. My question to you is, as we come to a close, what's next?
I want to shift the dial in Bradford. Been here 8.5 years. I'm ambitious for my city because my city is amazing. The people are amazing. They honour me every single day by allowing me to be their MP, allowing me to represent them. I want to be able to lead, to be able to bring change in my city, and that's when I've done my job. We've got the youngest city in the whole of the UK, and we've got some amazing. There's no poverty of aspiration amongst the kids in Bradford. There's no poverty of any of that. The poverty is the structures, and that's what I want to shatter. I want to shatter the things that stop us, that stop our young people from reaching where they need to reach. So I
Right,
really, really want to do that. So that's what's next for me. And I think if I can stay in that space and I can
right.
stay, I need a legacy, and I need a legacy to say, you know what, I changed something and made it better for the people that I serve. Because I want people to understand the beauty of what you get when you make a difference. It's fuel for the soul. It really, really is.
I am so inspired by your story, Naz Shah,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully we can have you back as a guest. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of our audience, and we hope that people take away the fact that regardless of what you're going through, you can end up in a better place, as Naz has done so. Again, thank you so much for being a part of Daraja and being an
No,
inspiration for our audience. Thank you.
no, thank you.